Is Jaren Jackson the most overrated player in fantasy basketball? Well, in today's show, I'm going to talk about that and a full season preview for the Memphis Grizzlies. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter the promo code LockedOnNBA for a free water bottle with any purchase. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. Apologies again that the Lakers preview show had the wrong questions on it. Just answer them. Just a way of collecting data and having some sort of tiebreaker system, because we get way more entry applications for Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl than we do spots. So apologies for that, but there is going to be another opportunity in today's show to get into the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. What is the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl? Well, it's a large field fantasy basketball tournament in either category leagues or points leagues. 12-team divisions with a maximum of 60 divisions in each. I think we'll get the 60 for categories. We might not get it for points, but we'll see. 40 max games per week. 18-man rosters, slow drafts for both. You can enter both of them. It's $50 entry. The top two finishers in each division make it through to the final Battle Royal week, and you get $200 back. And then everyone in that final Battle Royal week has a chance to win one of the top three prizes. Later in the show, we're going to be giving you a specific question to fill in on that entry form to hopefully get yourself a position in the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl for this upcoming season. But we are here to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. So, Warnie.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. How does the schedule look? That laugh felt a little bit off then. The schedule for the Grizzlies this season. They have 45 quality games for the year, and I'm done explaining what quality games are. If you don't know what they are, go watch one of the first 14 of these shows that I've done. They have 45 of them. That's sort of in the middle of the pack. It's not the highest, which is 51. The lowest is 39. Sorry, highest is 55. Lowest is 39. So they're closer to the low end versus the high end, and I'm guessing part of that is because of the Demetrius Morant suspension. They have 14 back-to-backs. That's right in the middle. 13 max weeks. A max week is when it's 4, when you play a 4-game week. So you've got the most games of anyone. So 13 of the 24 weeks. They're at maximum. Their playoff schedule is, I would say, relatively rough. There's a big stretch of 3-gamers in there. They start, if you finish 24th of March, they go 4-3-3. That's the end date for Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. They go 3-3-3 if you finish 31st of March. That's rough. They go 3-3-4 if you finish Yahoo default, 7th of April. And they go 3-4-4 if you finish on the 14th of April, which is the ESPN default situation. What's the pressure points on this team? Well, I don't really think there are many other things. It's what the hell happens without Ja Morant, who is suspended the first 25 games. At this point, before Media Day, before the preseason, we don't know. And I would expect in preseason, the guy that starts, and I believe I spoke to Keith Parrish about this and Joe Mullinax about this, that they said that the guy that starts the first game, the first starting lineup they run out there, first preseason game, is likely going to be the player who starts the first regular season game. So we know it's going to be Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson, Steve Adams. What we don't know is the other spot. There's probably 4 contenders, I would say. 5 maybe. And that's the pressure point. Are they going to start Luke Kennard and get shooting and spacing and a little bit of ball handling out there? Are they going to start David Roddy and get worse play out there? Roddy's at least got some size, but yeah, I don't think he should play the 3 ever. Are they going to start Jake LaRavia, who's made some big strides after struggling in year 1 and actually fits size-wise, ball movement-wise, shooting upside-wise decently well, but he hasn't shown it at all? Could they go back to Zaire Williams, who they had high hopes for last season and completely shit the bed? Or do they go with someone like Lil John Concha? Okay! Who's a really good defender, good out-of-position rebounder, solid ball mover. Shooting can be a little bit iffy. Yeah, so there's 5 different options there. So 5, yeah, Roddy, Laravia, Kennard, Concha, and... What did I miss someone? No, the other one they can go with is Santi Aldama. And they could go really, really big. I don't think they would do that. Isaiah Williams, the other one. That's 6 different options. And that just mucks everything up. Now, none of those guys are particularly high value. Luke Kennard's maybe the interesting one to take with your last pick. I don't really love Roddy or Laravia there. But if we do see that Jake starts opening night, well, he does move into round 13, round 14, pick 150 sort of discussions. Because if he starts and plays 29 minutes, 13, 4, 3, 1 steal, 1.5 threes, it's not bad. But it's just going to be a whole mess, I think, across that entire position, at least until Jar returns, and then, assuming he doesn't go out again, and then after that, everything will sort of settle back in to the role. I would put Luke Kennard as the heavy favourite into that position, but I haven't really heard anything. That first preseason game is going to be the key thing for us to watch. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dog shorts, they make you look good. Not only do they make you look good, they make you feel good because they're comfortable. With their cloud knit fabric, everything on the shorts just feels comfortable. It might look like a traditional khaki short, but they're not stiff and or cottony like that. It's got this the cloud knit fabric, as I said, with anti-stink sweat wicking fabric. So no matter what you're doing, whether you're playing on the golf course, you're out playing basketball, you're out at a mate's house, you're 10-pin bowling, whatever it is you're doing, Bird Dogs will transition themselves from a casual athletic short to a nice little short that you can wear going out. Makes your thighs pop as well with that slimmer fit. It's a fantastic thing. And always Bird Dogs is going to have an offer for you of something they're going to give you for free. Not only do you get the advantage of getting these brilliant shorts, but they give you something. And this time, it's a free water bottle. So if you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA at checkout, and you get that free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. So who are the breakout candidates on this team? I think the 2 names that I've got there, and what we talk about breakout is like, what is the chances they exceed their level of projections? That's what I'm looking at. I could throw Kennard there. I could throw Des Bane there. I could throw Jaren Jackson there, although he's a story for later on. But I've sort of baked that stuff in a little bit for Kennard, and I've baked it in for Bane already. And again, Jaren, different story. We'll talk about him later. But I haven't really given much thought or haven't given much of a bump to Laravia or Zaire because I just don't know how they're going to factor into the rotation. But if Taylor Jenkins decides that Jake's the starter, well, at least the first 2 months, the numbers could go through the roof. And then if he actually is successful in that role, he maintains a rotation role, even when Morant returns. And the same for Zaire Williams. I thought he was quite poor last season. I didn't love him I didn't like him at all, in fact, as a draft prospect. But the Grizzlies seemed to like him enough to trade up, which included Kenneth Murphy III in that trade to get to number 10 to get Williams. He hasn't done anything to justify it. What if they got faith back? What if last season the knee injury is what really killed him and he jumps into a larger role? I wouldn't be excited about either of those guys at this point, but I think they are worth mentioning as players that when we look at their projected level of production or how we see them for the upcoming season, there is a real chance that they can put some numbers up that maybe we weren't expecting. And now, let's go under the lens and talk about Des Bane. Bane is sometimes a little bit of a tricky one to look at because there are a few things. He's got this really interesting fantasy game where when you look at 9-cat ranking numbers, he looks like an unbelievable player. And you could look at his projection numbers for the season and you look and you go, man, is Desmond Bane going to be a top 20 player? Is Desmond Bane going to come out and blow up and be a pseudo first round guy? These are all things that do have the potential to, not to happen, but to be reported or to be pontificated on or to be discussed about where Bane goes, because we expect that he's going to take on more usage. with Ja out, I don't really think that's controversial at all. And yeah, that is this game of a scorer who hits threes, who does it efficiently, who doesn't turn the ball over a huge amount. That can look pretty good in fantasy leagues and in category rankings. But is it real? Last season for points leagues, 52nd, 48th in ESPN points leagues. That's Yahoo points league 52, ESPN 48th, and in -1 rankings, 49th. 49th. But when you look at the traditional 9-cat straight rankings, it'll tell you he was much better than that. And part of the reason why I'm a little bit down on him for head-to-head is his biggest strength comes from threes. And we can find threes in lots of spots. I'm not saying that they do it as efficiently or at the same volume as Bane or add the points on or any of that. But his number one category is threes. And that leads to, I think, sometimes an overvaluation of where a player like that sits. The other really interesting thing, look, and we've got the graphs we always show here, is that he started off the season, he had some struggles early, but he actually had some big weeks. I think we thought that he just struggled early on. He struggled week 1, but then 17 threes, 12 threes, 9 threes, hurt his toe, came back, struggled on the way back, but then was consistently 12, 10, 9, 12, 7, 7, 12, 4, 6, 7, 11, like double-digit threes every second week, which is really good. He averaged 3 threes a game. Those numbers are very, very good. But the trend is downwards. A lot of that is because there was a big gap in the middle. But he was sort of hovering. He was okay. He wasn't fantastic. He wasn't blowing up with 4 threes a game, Steph Curry-like. Could that be something that he does this season? Maybe. But watch this. Let's look at the usage for Deza. Started out with the 25, 26, a 32 usage week. Remember towards the end of last season, Ja Morant was out. And Bane's usage didn't really change. Now, some of that is Dillon Brooks being there, but it basically stayed the same. 27, 24, 25, 28. All those numbers, irrespective of what the actual number is, his number from week 10 to week 24 actually was going down. Even though Morant was out for big chunks of that stretch down the season, in and out with injury and with suspension and coming off the bench and all that stuff. He didn't see a gigantic spike in usage, and I think maybe some of what we price into Bane for this season is we think that's going to happen. What is more interesting is that the assists spiked. He had multiple weeks of getting around 20 assists a week, 19, 19, 15, 19, 16, 15, and that just continued to rise as Ja missed a bunch of time there. But, there's always a but. The difference here is that Dillon Brooks, who was playing alongside him in those lineups, is replaced by Marcus Smart, a legitimate real point guard. And when Morant comes back, it's going to be Smart and Morant both handling the ball, I would guess more than Bane. So while we can look at, this is where confusion can reign in terms of trying to project players, is that we look at Bane and we say, well, Morant is out, so his usage will rise and he'll have to take on more ball handling, not understanding that the Marcus Smart is in there, who provides more ball handling, more pick and roll stuff than what Dillon Brooks did. So does that? Now, Smart obviously doesn't do it to the same level as Morant doing it, but it doesn't allow for this gigantic spike. It's not just Morant out and nobody in. So while we looked at those assist numbers rising for Bane as the season went on, I'm not sure it's going to be quite the same. His -1 ranks, some really strong weeks early in the season, a top 20 week, a top 30 week, a 31st there. And then it was quite up or down. Now, some of that is schedule related, and when the good weeks were on, he was putting up pretty strong numbers even in -1, which I said he was well behind in terms of that versus standard category projections. He's going to be quite a good player this season. I'm not here to completely tear down Bane. He averaged 23.5 points last season with 5 assists a game. 23.5. Actually, that's not true. Sorry, my bad. He averaged 21.5 with 5 assists, 5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists. Yeah, I think that assist pushed to 5 this season. I think the scoring gets to maybe 23. But also remember that when you're looking at season averages, it's all going to be up here early on, and then it's probably going to dip later on. Especially the assist numbers, where he goes from second option behind Smart to third option behind Smart and Morant. And even though the usage didn't spike last season, it might have a little bit of a spike this year. Now, Bane is still young. He's in year 5. He's 25, though. He's older than a lot of those players. But he's still not at his peak. And he's going, in terms of drafts, he's going at, I think, okay spots. Like, it really depends where you're drafting, though. There's like an ADP of 22 on Yahoo, which I think is okay. But again, he's valued a lot by the threes. That really helps him in terms of production, although I don't think the threes will be his best category this season. But then you get to certain other spots where Des Bane's got an ADP of 54 on ESPN. Like, that's crazy. That's insane value. Even on Fantrax, he's got an ADP of 38. Even that, I think, is really good value. So where you're drafting and how you're looking at him just depends on what site you're on and who you're drafting with. This was interesting to me, the Darko DPM change graph. Started out with some really positive improvements, kept going positive improvements. Now, he hasn't hit any regression or anything, but the rate of improvement for him slowed down considerably last season. I think we might get that spiking up a little bit at the start of the year, but he is 25. Again, this is not regression. He's not at a spot where he's getting worse, but he is 25. So as a general rule, a lot of rookies come in and they're year 6 by now, year 7 maybe. Bane came in as an older player. Actually, he's not year 5. He's his 4th year, sorry. So, he's in that situation where when those players come in at 19, they get to age 25, their rate of progression slows because they're basically in this like area, like a pre-peak, pre-prime. And Bane's sort of there already, which a lot of that is age-related. There's some experience factor. But he's getting to that where I'm not sure we're quite at the very best version of Des Bane. And we're definitely on the way down. But we're a lot closer to the very best version of Des Bane than I think we might think is the case. And I'd be really cautious with him early season if those numbers do spike as to whether they can continue at that level. The last thing on Bane here I want to talk about is a couple of things I looked at there. What is the percentage of shots at the rim that were unassisted is, I think, interesting to look at because on this graph, we've got a bunch of different players, which is what we always do. Because that's how this stuff works. There's a few guys on here that I think are pretty interesting for us to take a look at. As I just realized that's the wrong graph, and that's the one from the Lakers and Austin Reeves. I'll go fix it. That's a better graph. So what I'm actually looking at here for this one is a couple of things. Offensive involvement rate, so how often you're involved in the offense. And the second part there on the y-axis is 3-point pull-up talent percentile. Now, Bane is a very good off the catch and shoot 3-point shooter. He's elite at that. And I wanted to see what he's able to do when the ball is in his hands more. Is he still that level of 3-point shooter? And it looks like yes. 95th percentile in pull-up 3-point shooting ability. The other one there that is interesting is offensive involvement rate percentile. I mean, how often are you involved in the offense? In terms of the NBA, Bane's around a bit under the 70th percentile. That's equivalent with someone like an Austin Reeves. I've got Jaren Jackson on this graph as well, who's down below 60th percentile involvement rate. I think that Jaren's going to take probably a bigger usage step forward than Bane. And Jaren's obviously way down the bottom in that left corner with lower 3-point pull-up shooting talent percentile. But the zone that Bane needs to get to as a player, I think, without Morant there's two guys that are further to the right. And one of them is Tyler Hero, the other one's Zach LaVine. They are up there closer to that 90th percentile in involvement rate, but also still running at 95, 96th percentile in terms of pull-up talent numbers and shooting numbers. Ja Morant's way over there, and you can see how much of the offense he's involved in, like 97th percentile. His pull-up 3-point shooting talent, which is obviously the hardest shot to hit versus catch and shoot, is equivalent to Austin Reeves. Still better than you think, but it's there. But Bane's challenge is going to be here. As his offensive involvement rate increases, or if it does he maintain that efficiency where Hero and LaVine are? Because at the moment, like, he's putting up really good fantasy numbers, he's doing it efficiently, he's hitting the threes, but if he has to do more of this himself, if he has to be involved more, does the 3-point shooting talent stick? He's doing it on a lower volume of offensive involvement as a general rule, and we want to see if that maintains, or does it head more down towards where Morant is in that? He's obviously a way better shooter than Morant, but it is, I think, something that we can't just necessarily port everything across. Well, he's this level of shooter, he's this efficient, we'll give him 4 extra usage percentage points, and he might not even get it. Does all that stuff stick? And the answer is probably not. and just factor some of that in when you're considering him for one of your fantasy draft picks. Today's episode is also brought to you by DoorDash. You get stuff delivered from restaurants or DoorDash all the time. But you're there, you're sitting at home, you're cooking yourself dinner today. And you sit there and you go, I do not have an onion. Where's my onions? How do I cook my base flavor here without onions? I need this. I can't leave the house. My partner's got the car. She's at work. What am I going to do? Well, DoorDash does grocery deliveries for you. With thousands of grocery stores to choose from, you'll find the best in your neighborhood and boost the local economy with each and every order. Now, it's very easy to do this, but if you're not going to go in there and say, give me an onion, and they come back with a white salad onion or a red onion. I want a brown onion. I want the ones that I need to cook for my flavor base. You select all this on the DoorDash app, and they will sort it out and get you it as if you are the one there picking it out yourself. You get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. Limited time offer, terms apply. That's 50% off, up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget, the code is LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Let's talk fantasy sleepers here for the Grizzlies, because there are a couple of guys who I think are ranked interestingly. And one of them is the big man in the middle, Steve Adams. Adams is a guy, again, much like Bane, where some standard ranking numbers can look very, very different for him. They won't look particularly strong at all because he is a putrid free throw shooter. And if we look at what Adams did last season, he averaged only 8.6 points and shot 36% from the line. That is a disgusting number on 3 attempts. He also grabbed 11.5 boards. He had over 2 assists. He blocked a shot, over a shot, and was at 0.9 steals and shot 60 from the field. So there are significant positives in his game and one absolutely glaring huge negative. And the scoring is a bit of a negative as well. But I don't think it justifies these rankings. 175th in 9-cat leagues on Yahoo and for points leagues. I think he beats that easy. 135th for ADP on Yahoo. Well, I think he's better than that. Fantrax ADP 145, and then ESPN is at 204 for category and 185 for ESPN points leagues. For reference, last season Steven Adams was 94th per game in Yahoo points leagues. He was 110th per game in ESPN points leagues. His -1 ranking for category leagues last season was one of the biggest jumps of anybody, 72nd. And this is saying in a 18-team league, I wouldn't even bother, which I think is really crazy. Now, he's not going to be for everybody. You might add him to your team and it makes no sense whatsoever. But there's going to be a team in your league that this makes sense for. We did have that knee injury end of last season, and there are some people I know that just don't have any faith in him at all, and they think that Xavier T. Tillman is going to start for them, which again I think is absolutely insane. But Adams needs to play next to Jaren. Jaren needs Adams next to him. He is going to play those 29, 30 minutes. He's going to be a good rebounder. He's going to do those little things. It's not sexy. It's not this great, unbelievable upside pick. But he goes undrafted everywhere. And for at least one team in your league, he will make a ton of sense. Now, at the start of this show, I said, is Jaren Jackson one of the most overrated or misrated, or I said something like that, fantasy player? And yes and no. Yes and no. You know, I've been on a tear talking about the way that blocks overvalues a player. You go and look and see that Jaren was the 12th ranked player last season, and it's clearly garbage, right? He wasn't. But because those blocks are so non-normally distributed, that he's putting up Z scores of 4.6, it gives this gigantic weighting to how good the rankings suggest that he is. And that's part of the reason that I went out and spent months of my time trying to figure out this Durant system, which did drop him down. Now, I do think that Jaren is going to take a pretty sizable step forward in usage, at least early in the season. We have seen for so many different players, and Jaren as well, is that when the usage goes up, the block rate goes down. So we're not expecting him to do what he did last season in terms of blocks. But he's going to be a better scorer. He's a solid shooter. He's got room to improve in all those areas. But the stark differences here for Jaren across the board are interesting. He's ranked 21st on Yahoo. Originally, he was ranked 13th, which was crazy. He's ranked 21st now. His ADP on Yahoo is 16, the same as on Fantrax, but that is pushing down because rank influences ADP. He's going to end up with an ADP of 20, and that's not a sleeper for Jaren. That's probably getting close to being about right. Durant actually drops him to about 27th because of that sort of squishing of some of the values in blocks. And one thing, when I talk about Z scores for blocks in these categories and the non-normality of it, it's totally okay to use a regular Z score to compare someone's blocks to someone else's blocks, because all that is telling you is how many standard deviations that player is away from the mean in that thing, and that's all fine because it's the same sample. But the problem that I had with it is when you're trying to use it to standardize across multiple categories, and that is telling you that Jaren's 3 blocks per game is the equivalent of someone scoring 65 points in a game or getting 22 assists in a game as an average. And that is just like not real. Like it's not fair income. It's not a way to standardize things across. But then we go to ESPN and he's got a rank of 43 for 9 category leagues. And that's what the hell is that? 36th for points leagues. And an ADP of 45, which every one of those is, I say wrong? Yeah, it's wrong. Every one of those is wrong. Like there's no reason for that to be the case. ESPN points leagues last season, Jaren was 36th per game. So they've just said, well, nah, no improvement. He won't get extra shots without Jar there. Maybe the drop in blocks, because ESPN counts was 4, offsets an increase in points for that early part. I don't know. But the category league stuff there is crazy. So, is Jaren wildly overrated? Yeah, if you consider him a fringe first-round player. Is he a massive sleeper if you look at ESPN's rankings and ADP? Also, yes. So he covers both of those things. If you do want to enter the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, easy question for you. Where did Jaren Jackson rank last season in ESPN points leagues? The answer is 36th. So just on the entry form, just write 36. Don't write 36 with a TH. Don't do that. Just write 36, the number 36 in that entry form. That's all you need to enter to get there. And hopefully I see you in one of those divisions. Let's talk fantasy busts. Had to play my little stinger again. I didn't want it to go to waste. I don't think there's anyone who's actually a bust on this. Like I could have said that Jaren at 13 would have been a bust, but he's not anymore. The one thing that is a bust, and I didn't want to just put this in as the only thing to highlight here, is Ja Morant with an ADP of 27 on ESPN. Batshit insanity. Now, he's ranked 102 in their category league ranks. Totally okay. We know he's missing 25 games. I don't know why anyone is drafting him at 27. That is insane. I know he's probably a first-round player per game or top 15, but you don't pick him at 27 when he's missing a minimum of 25 games. Yahoo's got him ranked in the same spot. There's no one who I go, that's dreadful why they ranked at that spot. Again, Jaren, maybe marginally high. Bane at 22, maybe marginally high, but probably not. Okay, not too bad. Smart at 77, no, not really. That's totally okay. Steven Adams is a sleeper. This is no one who comes out as a bust on this team. Let's talk Ja Morant now. 25 game suspension to begin the season. A reminder, I will get this argument plenty of times. People will look at Ja Morant and they'll say, Josh, you can take him at 50 because he comes back fantasy playoffs and you get a stud there. He's just not a stud in category leagues in that way. He is okay. The value of his points and assists is really strong and that can help teams, but his field goals are rough. His free throws can be rough. He doesn't get any steals. He's a lower rebound. He's not actually, let me just double check that. What he actually averaged last season. Yeah, 6 rebounds, okay, but lowish steals, low volume threes, below average field goals on high volume, really quite poor free throws considering the volume that he takes as well. It's just all adds up to being a particularly not great fantasy category player. So for him to be, like, best case for him category-wise is maybe 40th per game. So I'd want to take that outside the top 75, top 80 probably, knowing that not only does he miss 25, but then there's an injury risk on top of that. Then is there another suspension risk? He would have said no, But I also would have said no after he was suspended the first time. And this happened. So, yeah, not doing it. Points leagues, it's really different because Ja Morant should be a top 15 player. He was 13th per game last season. So him in a points league at 60, started around 6, when he comes back, like the risk that you're taking for a potential first round player is not that big. But that return in a category league just isn't there. Brandon Clark tore his Achilles last season. The hope is that he returns post All-Star break, but remember, he'll be on a minutes restriction. He'll be on a back-to-back limit situation, and they actually don't need him to play big minutes because they'll have Jaren, they'll have Adams, they'll have Tillman, they'll have Aldama, and Clark would be a rotation guy, of course, and they'd love to ramp him up, but there's no way that you draft him in fantasy, A, when he doesn't even have a big minute role to begin with, even if he was healthy, and then he's got to wait all this time, and then we've got to wait for him to come back, and we've got to wait for him to get into shape, which probably doesn't happen really fully until the playoffs anyway. Steven Adams ended last season without playing with his knee problem that cooked him in the playoffs, but he's ready to go and cracking on, which is great. Let's talk a trade option. I do think there is a chance that Brandon Clark might be traded. I've already outlined there are other options on this team. Aldama, Tillman, Jackson, Adams, maybe they believe in Kenneth Lofton, I don't know. But they are in a situation where if they're looking to just get something back to really compete this season, they could send out Clark, dump even an asset on there to get someone back who's actually going to be a contributor on the wing for them this season. The team they'd have to trade that to would be someone who's not particularly interested in competing and is looking for an interesting big man like Clark who can be a quite good player. I actually don't think this is going to happen, but when I looked through their roster, I think that's probably the most likely guy to be moved, just finding a team that wants to accumulate future assets and get something back now to really help you push through. Contract year player, it is Xavier T. Illman, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent. He did pretty well, I thought, in the playoffs. He had a really good rookie season. He struggled a little bit year 2 and was out of the rotation a lot, pushed back in and played well in the playoffs, and will have a rotation role as long as Brandon Clark is out. But he's not going to be anything more than a deeper league fantasy guy unless Adams is hurt, and then he'll push into a larger role, and then he will become a 12-team league option if Adams doesn't play. The risks in the rotation that we don't know of or we can't foresee at this point, what if Taylor Jenkins actually does decide to go bigger? One thing about Jenkins to note also is that the Grizzlies, and this is going to be really interesting in Toronto, that the Grizzlies don't play their guys' minutes. Now, part of Jaren's low minutes is some of the foul stuff, but it's also they just don't play them big minutes. So, 32, 33, and Darko Rajakovic, who's gone up to Toronto, was on this Memphis staff. What if he brings that mentality to Toronto? Be aware of that when you're drafting Scott Barnes, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby. If they play 32 or 33 instead of 37, well, that's a big difference. That's just a side note completely here. What if they decide, well, Aldama can shoot. Let's try Aldama, Jaren, and Adams together. Jaren and Aldama can both shoot, can guard the perimeter. Jaren's pretty good at that as well as protecting the rim. And that's because those small forwards just aren't working. There's a chance of that. They didn't really do it at all last season, but there is a chance. The small forward committee, are they just going to run 20 minutes each for all of those guys? Does someone win out? We always want to keep an eye on who's going to win out there. And the other one is Derrick Rose, who's on this team. I don't know why they committed to him. They want him to mentor Ja Morant. They should have just got Kevin Porter in to mentor him. Not that Derrick Rose is the same as Kevin Porter. He's not accused of domestic violence, but he does have credible rape allegations against him and has left teams without telling them in the past. So I don't know why he's considered a mentor option for Ja. Although, to be fair to Rose, he's been much better. And he's been really quite good for the last 4 or 5 years or whatever it is. And players do love him. I understand that. But what if he's just cooked? He got taken out of the rotation by his godfather, Tom Thibodeau, last season, and said, we can't do this anymore with you, old mate. So we know he's had a lot of knee problems, a lot of ankle problems. He's going to be forced into being the backup point guard while Morant is out. He might not be able to do it, which means they have to rely heavily on Kennard and on Bane to be the secondary ball handlers behind Smart, which helps those guys. But if Rose just can't do it, there is a real chance of some other guys having to gain some extra value. There are 2 guys, I could have included a third here, 2 guys who you'd consider some permanent monsters. Brandon Clark, if he ever played 28 a game, He'll be a top 70 fantasy guy. Huge field goals, pretty good blocks, pretty good steals, pretty strong free throws, good rebounds. He's a very good fantasy category player. And the other one is fellow big man Xavier T. Illman, who's a very good steals guy as a big man. I think he's got some passing chops and some shooting chops, which haven't all come through yet in the NBA. But these are guys that, if they're forced into larger roles, you'd want to roster them. The other one is Ken Lofton, who put up, that 40-pointer in the final game of the season. I know he's an interesting guy to watch. You don't see many actual big chunguses like that at 6'8", playing center with an ass that's also 6'8" wide, throwing their weight around and scoring the way they do. Like, he can't defend at all. And yeah, he's got some interesting shooting ability. He can pass a little bit, but I don't think that he's an NBA caliber rotation guy. But if he was getting rotation minutes, then he's an interesting fantasy player. I just don't think it's going to happen. But he's not quite even as good, I think, as Clark or Tillman in terms of per minute production. The depth chart, I've got Morant on the bench there, just to say how we're going to start the season. Marcus Smart will start. Smart is totally okay. Round 8 in fantasy leagues. Points leagues, you're probably pushing back around 9. Even if you want to go round 7 in category leagues, I don't think that's horrific. I think there is value in that. People really denigrate Smart's fantasy game, and he did drop off a little bit last season. That's true, but I do think he's got an opportunity to put up a pretty sizable, interesting season where you can get him at relatively late spots. Like, ESPN's got an ADP of 105 on Smarto. I think you can get a couple of rounds of value on that. Derek Rose also in the depth chart there, and Jacob Gilliard's a two-way player. Decent high assist rate. Watch him if he ever gets minutes, if Rose is washed. For the wings, they're going to start Bane and Kennard. Kennard will be a late round pick who you'd probably drop after 25 games, but he got 15 points with 3 threes and maybe 4 assists to begin the season. That's useful enough. Then there is Lil John Conchar, who's also a really good fantasy player. Vincey Williams and Zaire Williams. Conchar, Kennard, watch those guys. They can play the 2 and the 3, and they could get some extra minutes early on in the season. In terms of forwards, I don't think they're starting a traditional forward this season, but their reserves are Roddy and LaRavia, who could start at the 3, but I'm not predicting them to start there. And the other one is GG Jackson on a 2-way, really high scoring upside, efficiency issues, probably doesn't play at all for this team, really, mainly for the hustle, I would guess, most of the season. And they're going to start Jaren and Steven Adams as their 2 bigs, and then behind them is Aldama, Tillman, Clark, and Lofton. I think I've covered most of the players. As I said, Jaren is okay if you want to grab him very end of round 2 in category leagues. Start of round 3 is probably more like it, but just understand how the blocks thing can skew some of the valuations of players. The way that Durant and Bazemore looks at things, it actually drops the value of the Duck, Luke Kennard. It drops the value of Jaren Jackson, but it does bump Tillman and Smart. Smart is really well liked by the Durant system, so bear that in mind. And if you look at Bazemore, which is my dynasty metric, it's got Bane really high. Top 15 player in dynasty leagues. That's high. And I look at that and go, very interesting result to spit out. It's got Jaren inside the top 20, which is totally reasonable as well. At the moment, my Bazemore is built off Durant, but when it does get released, you'll be able to build it off whatever rankings you want. Straight 9 cat, -1 rankings, punt turnovers, punt assists, fantasy points. You can build it off whatever. Ja Morant is not ranked in the top 40 for my Bazemore ranking because, again, he's never shown an ability to be a consistently good category league player. And then there's availability concerns that are baked in there too. And David Roddy actually came out a little bit better than Jake LaRavia. I didn't expect that. He did come out top 200. I don't really see Roddy as a viable NBA player super long term, but he did come out with a ranking on Bazemore better than I thought he would be. And that does it for me today. Don't forget to follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. And on YouTube, please thumb it up and please leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.
We're just normal men.
What do you mean, normal men?
We're just innocent men.